So in case you've never seen a wolf on a bar, that's what it looks like. Listening this morning, I did some follow-up over lunch and printed off some correspondence from DEQ regarding composting. This is from 2006. One thing to note in here, we talked about where they're using the compost, and it says in here it'll be used within the DOT district where that animal was picked up. So I'm sure the districts vary. So just some interesting conversations there. And then talked about the game farm that had CWD in it, the Kessler game farm, which is by Phillipsburg. And I believe it's Flint Creek that flows pretty much right through it, which is a tributary of Rock Creek. And then the trace back went to another game farm, which is down by Hardin. And I have a map here. One thing enforcement does too is we do the roadkill salvage permit system. So if someone hits a deer on the road, they can pick it up and get a permit. In order to get that permit, they have to click on a map where they picked it up. So we have a pretty good idea where that deer was. And what I did, I had our map guys put together a map showing where the game farms were and where the roadkills are. So the map man out has all the elk, mule deer, and whitetail salvage permits and the location of the game farms. I did this just to see if there was any correlation here, because we've been talking about seeing if we can't get roadkill samples to test for CWD. It also gives you an idea how far apart the two game farms were. The Elk Valley Game Ranch did get animals from the Kessler Game Farm. They did test negative for CWD. Give you a second or two to look at that. Any questions on that?
Okay.
How much does this wildlife pay for each car that hits one of these?
How many bumpers are involved? Yeah. Yeah, there's been several thousand animals picked up in the last couple of years. And one thing we're doing with our salvage permit system too is we're going to tweak it just a little bit. Our tech folks are working on it right now, but we're going to tweak it in such a way that we're going to be able to request the heads that people pick up. Part of the rules of picking up roadkill is they have to pick up the whole animal. So they will have the head in their possession. And we're going to be able to request or direct them to a regional or area office to turn in that head sweep test. So it potentially could get several thousand samples that we previously wouldn't get.
Mike,
Yeah.
there's a question.
Yeah.
Do you still have a concern about the outbound game range?
They're not licensed anymore?
No, they're not. I mean, do you still have an issue there? I mean, do you still have a question about any of that there? We
don't.
own that is the question I'm asking as well.
Yeah, we don't.
Okay.
But we just know that that was one of the trace backs
Got it.
from the Phillipsburg
Okay.
facility. Yeah, we don't have to consider that. We do around Phillipsburg, obviously.
Sure.
I don't know, Tim, have you talked about the depopulation, incinerator and stuff that was there?
Not really at Elk Valley, I don't think. I think we sat sacrificed, well, a little bit I did. We sacrificed 26 animals, I think it was, and those were held in a refrigerated food truck. And we also helicopter gunned 20, I can't remember, but probably mule deer in that area that were ingressed animals in that area. Those were all tested for chronic wasting disease. Well, everything was negative for CWD.
So do you take everything inside the high fence?
We did everything we could find. Yeah, that egressed animals, and those animals actually, it wasn't an incinerator, but the deer that were helicopter gunned, in fact, were all collected and buried in a trench there on the Elk Valley.
Do you know where they were?
We've got a map and it was right behind where we'd set up our operations to collect samples from those animals. But there is a map, yeah, that indicates where that is.
Okay. That'd be interesting.
Okay, I might be able to get you pretty close.
And Mike, tell me if I'm wrong, that you would now, I'm assuming those records are somewhere.
Yeah, they're archived, and I could probably go and dig that up.
I'm assuming the same thing.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Tim, was this the Elk Valley one that you were talking about?
Yes.
That was depopulated as well?
That was depopulated as well because they had animals that they had received from
I see. Okay.
the Kessler facility.
Yeah.
I'm sure before that Kessler facility was put under quarantine for tuberculosis.
Right, so there was 26 there, and didn't you say 83 at Kessler earlier?
Correct.
Did you describe or talk about the incinerator they had? You were there, right?
I was there.
Yeah. Describe what they did.
Okay, and it goes to, getting rid of these animals, whether we go into an action to depopulate an area or to collect samples in an area. We had, at that time, Department of Livestock contracted with an outfit out of North Dakota and used what they call a trench incinerator. A trench was prepared. I wasn't there when that was done, but I think 4 or 5 feet deep. And then that trench incinerator, what that is a system of manifolds that are set along the top of the trench. That air is then blown through those manifolds into the trench, which increases considerably the temperature. And I think that temperature was measured at about 1,300 degrees with that trench incinerator that was used to get rid of the animals at the Phillipsburg facility. Originally, they wanted to take those animals to a Type 2, Class 2 sanitary landfill. And I think they talked about Great Falls at first. And they thought about it and said, no, wait a minute. We don't want those animals even in our Class 2 landfill. So that was the only option, was to bring in that trench incinerator from North Dakota.
So the trench incinerator, is it natural gas, or do you put kerosene on it and then the forced air onto it? Or?
It was, actually it was wood fired. And there was cords of wood laid into that trench, from what I understand. And then that trench incinerator was started with the air blowing into the burning fire. And I was told that thing got so hot with the elk carcasses in there that there wasn't even any smoke that came off of it. It just burned everything. And like I said, I wasn't there when that was burning.
Yeah, then they buried it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, anything else? One thing I do with the field wardens, every once in a while, there's a link I have here to a movie, so we're gonna watch a movie. I sent this out to the field wardens just to kind of get them excited about doing their inspections on alternative livestock facilities. And some of you may have seen this, some maybe not, but it's about a 13, 14-minute clip, 12 and a half minutes. It's pretty kind of, it was shocking to me when I first saw it, so we'll just take a few minutes and watch this.
Mike, how many alternative livestock facilities do we have?
Right now, currently we have 26 currently licensed, and in those 26 facilities, there are 872 animals, which is roughly, I didn't break that out, but I'd say that that's about 800 elk. The rest are a mixture of deer, bighorn sheep, some other things. It's primarily elk.
Comparatively, when I started in 1999, there was, I think, 81 alternative livestock ranches in Montana.
Very good. Sound works.
The Wisconsin government had to buy it and double fence it to keep everything out. The soil is presumed to be riddled with a new and almost indestructible pathogen that causes a fatal brain wasting disease.
Can everybody hear?
That's about as loud as it goes.
I'd be interested in knowing why the Environmental Protection Agency doesn't declare a site like this a Superfund site, and what it would take to get that accomplished so that the environment can be cleaned up of this disease.
An epidemic of chronic wasting disease is spreading across the continent. It's an always fatal deer version of mad cow, but this one is highly contagious.
If there was a disease that would spread in humans, like chronic wasting disease spreads through deer, we really would have an enormous challenge on our hands.
CWD is already a grave threat to deer. It's an elk, moose, within range of caribou, and the human health impacts are unknown. But this new disease is just a symptom of the bigger story that drew me in all those years ago. An obscure government proposal to put wildlife behind fences, domesticate them like cows. I asked why and what it would mean. Economists were skeptical, and scientists warned of grave consequences. But focus on a single area or a snippet of time misses the big picture. The more we looked into it, the more it became clear it was a really bad idea.
At that particular time, the government was going, you must diversify. That's how we got looking at the elk industry. Got most of our information like from government pamphlets. At that time, they were holding workshops during the winter.
But it didn't make any sense, least of all economic. Biologists condemned it, saying it would gut the very principles of our system of conservation to once again privatize and commercialize wildlife. Underpinning everything were scientists' grave concerns about disease threats to wildlife and to us. But no one was paying attention.
About 3/4 of all of the emerging infectious diseases impacting society have a wildlife base.
But the thing everyone kept missing was our role, domestication. Turns out we've unwittingly created most of the infectious diseases we suffer. Capturing and confining wild animals is a veritable disease factory. Diseases are responsible for more death and misery than all our wars and murders combined. Yet we keep on creating them. CWD is just one of the latest. From its emergence in the 1960s, CWD was spreading slowly. Then, within just a few years, it exploded across the landscape. It was imported to Canada with game farm animals from South Dakota. When asked how it was spreading so quickly, Bruce Cheesebro, chief scientist at the Rocky Mountain Lab, said simply, by truck. But it didn't stay inside the fences.
I became president of Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation in February of 2001, and in early April of 2001, the first case of chronic wasting disease in the wild was found in Saskatchewan, and for that matter, all of Canada.
the spot that I'm about to show you, you can see where animals have literally crawled underneath the fence or escaped from that fence out into the wild here. You know, absolutely insane. Look at the tracks. Any hunter, tell me what kind of tracks them are. That's elk track. Absolutely horseshit. And this is regulated horseshit.
Hunter Jim King learned firsthand about the risk of escapes after harvesting a deer with ear tags.
We got a phone call from the conservation officer in Nipmuc that said who he's from, who he was, and he said, please do not do anything with that animal.
And that somebody would be there on Monday to pick it up. I saw the truck pull up, and then they did their thing that they had to do. They had to garb up and put boots on and white suits and gloves and masks, which I thought was unusual. Shoulder and loaded the deer into their government truck.
She was a little upset, and so was I, because we've been having this thing with no coveralls, no gloves, no mask, and wondering what's wrong.
They never gave any explanation. We never heard anything from the officials ever again.
Officials never told them, but the deer was infected with CWD.
There's really two secular religions in the state of Wisconsin. One is obviously the Green Bay Packers, and the other is deer hunting. And you better not screw up either one of them.
What does anything?
I like going out, and then my dad always donates to the yard, which is nice.
He started me out when I was 12, and now she's 10 this year. It's her first year that she's able to hunt, so this is her first opening morning.
With more than 1.5 million deer, Wisconsin is home to one of the highest concentrations of whitetails in the world. So for scientists, the news of CWD in Wisconsin was staggering.
And I think there was a little bit of, panic almost that sent in. It's like, oh my gosh, we've got CWD now in a really dense population of deer.
All of us have certain moments in time that are just imprinted on our memories. For me, the hearing that there was definitive evidence of chronic wasting disease in wild deer in southern Wisconsin was one of those moments.
Are you guys doing a shoulder mount with the buck today? No. We're going to take samples from both, that's okay? All right.
We're here to collect CWD samples, colorectal lymph nodes, from adult deer that are coming through, and we're doing it at hunter request. And we're continuing to find new positives at a higher rate and in a wider geographic area, suggesting the disease is doing two things. It's growing and it's spreading.
Nowhere is that more evident than on Matt Lennox's dairy farm.
In 2005, we had a couple deer shot that were positive. And then in 2008, we had a half dozen deer that were positive. And then in the next couple of years, we had a number of sick ones that were harvested. And then in 2012, we had a dozen deer shot that were positive, with half of them being visibly sick. It is sad and disheartening to find a sick deer like that. You never want to see that.
Early on, there was some surveys done by the department that if prevalence in an area reached 50%, hunters would stop hunting.
Midwestern whitetail deer populations are notorious for growing at extremely fast rates. So if hunters chose to switch to not hunt in those populations, how would we then manage deer herds?
If we lose those hunters, that deer population is going to expand out of control, and then we have an ecological disaster.
Chronic wasting disease has now spread to 22 states, 2 Canadian provinces, and South Korea. Top prion scientist Neil Cashman described what may be the most resilient disease agent ever encountered, saying, "It can persist in water, it can persist in soil, it's spreading without check. It's arguably the most contagious prion disease, and the human health impact is unknown."
While there is no evidence yet that CWD has passed to humans, there's plenty of research that indicates that the potential is there. It may be very small, but it is not zero.
I do believe it's going to take a clearly documented human case, prion disease, that seems to have originated from exposure to a chronic wasting disease prion, or strong evidence that there is livestock impact. I actually think it's going to take what somebody like me sees as the nightmare scenario.
In humans, if we had a disease like that, it would make HIV look just like a picnic.
This sobering thought is something we all hope won't happen. But history is littered with examples of pandemics fostered in domestic animals. The 1918 flu virus killed more people in 25 weeks than AIDS has in 25 years. It came from chickens. Bringing wildlife into captivity is a disease factory. As the epidemics arrived, entire herds had to be destroyed. TB was followed by chronic wasting disease that has been found on 68 game farms in Saskatchewan.
I mean, I'll never forget, it was the Easter long weekend, and the salmons come in.
There was other farms, the same thing happened to them. So it wasn't just a unique situation, that's just the way it was dealt with.
These few highlights touch only the surface of this amazing story. Thanks to the generous support of people like you and the ongoing efforts of leading scientists and experts, we're well on our way. But people have a right to know the whole story, and it must reach all with interest at stake, and that's everyone. This is your wildlife. It's your health. It's your future and that of your children and grandchildren. That's why we've set out to tell this story through a feature-length, theatrical release documentary. And we can't do it without your help. Please donate to the film No Accident. Help us communicate the simple truth that we can have conservation and health and prosperity, or we can keep threatening them all. This is no accident.
That's what I use to get warnings fired. That works. Has anyone seen that before? Mike, do you have anything to add to that? I didn't know you were so famous. So yeah, I use that to just underscore the importance of wardens getting out and inspecting their facilities in their area. Let's see. So I got another handout. Watch your mic. What's that? So watch your mic.
Is it connected to you? No.
So what this is an alternative livestock program evaluation from 2000. Some of the information in here is relevant, some of it isn't, things have changed. But I think it gives a pretty good historical perspective on game farming in Montana. We've been regulating game farms since 1917.
Since what?
1917. It's just
When you say we in that sentence, Mike, is that Montana or is that in?
that was Fish and Wildlife Parks, or Fish and Game as it was then. But it was never really popular. until the 70s and 80s, then things happened in the world that made it popular. There's a few things in there that I'd like to point out. The main history in this, it starts on page 3, the program framework. When you read through this and look at game farms in Montana, and it was talked about earlier, we do have dual authority with the Department of Livestock. Department of Livestock has complete authority over the animals, animal health, the disease, some of the interior equipment that's required. Fish and Wildlife Parks has authority over the fences and record keeping. So when you read through this, just kind of keep that in mind, where the authorities lie. So yeah, we've been regulating this since 1917. But it's, like I said, starting 80s, 90s, there became a lot of public scrutiny over it. There was legislation in 93, 95, 99. And in 99, that's when livestock got a little more authority over the animals themselves. So the Department of Livestock is responsible for the identification and markings of animals, inspection, transportation, and importation of animals, issuing quarantine orders, health inspections, inspecting interior farm facilities, approving quarantine facilities or plans, and enforcement and rulemaking related to those functions. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks has jurisdiction over licensing operations, inspection of exterior fencing, classification of the exotic animals, inspection of the land to be covered by the license, inspection of the owner's books, removal of wild animals from within the enclosure. Once the enclosure has been, once the license has been issued, and we have rulemaking authority over those functions. So, yeah, pages 3 through 5, pretty much of the history, the authorities. With the exception of the Alternative Livestock Advisory Council, that no longer exists. There's a lot of history in here. So that was in 2000, June 29th of 2000. The general election in November 2000. There was a citizens initiative that put even more teeth into the alternative livestock laws, which basically would prohibit any new game farms, prohibit transfer of existing game farm licenses, and would prohibit shooting of game farm animals for a fee. In other words, canned hunts. And I got the exact language right from Secretary of State's website as it appeared in their publication before the election. Some of you might remember it as I-143. So that'll give a little more history to where we are as far as laws and administrative rules.
Mike, can you speak to what were the drivers for that citizen initiative? So here we are in a conversation about CWD. As I recall, that necessarily wasn't front and center in that conversation, but
CWD was not. It was the public. Maybe Joe could speak to it a little bit. The public didn't like the idea of canned hunts. They realized the importance or the significance of having farm wildlife and all that. Yes.
I was involved in getting signatures for this.
Okay.
And I talked to people about things that really concern me, wildlife diseases and escaping and stuff. And I said, it'll do away with canned hunts. And he asked me, what's that? And I'm told we used to do this. Canned hunts is what was passed.
Nonetheless, yeah, I was involved through the Wildlife Society in that same thing. The Wildlife Society took a position on that. And it was, the canned hunts was a big one, but also disease issues did come up. And as I recall, it was a pretty narrow vote. Was it 51-49 or something?
51.4% for it, 48.6% against it.
Yeah.
And there was roughly 400,000 votes. It was close.
But it certainly is, for our purposes anyway, a monumental piece of legislation that really puts us in a much different position than other states that do have those game farms.
Yeah, that's one reason you see 82 game farms in 2000 down to 26 now. Because a lot of those are just going by attrition. People just are renewing, they don't have animals, they're retiring. There's really only 2 big game farms in the state now that are really producing animals. A lot of those are exported to primarily 2 game farms that do canned hunts in Idaho. The ones that do have animals, the smaller ones, 10, 15, 20 animals, it's their own use.
Can you comment on some of the like herd health certification that, just briefly, that has to be done for licensing purposes?
That's Department of Livestock regulation. There's a chronic wasting disease program that a producer has to participate in before they can export animals out of the state. And they have to be CWD free. I think I pulled that up.
And similarly for imports, that applies to the limited number of imports that happen, right?
Yes, any animals that coming into the state have to be certified CWD free for, I think it's 5 years. But this is part of their livestock's administrative rules, different levels. Level 5, the status of the herd has been clean for 5 years.
Mike, you might get to it, but the drastic reduction in alternative livestock ranches, at the time I-143 was passed, I think there were, out of the 82 game farms, I think there were 6 or 7 of those that actually offered the quote-unquote canned hunts. That was a factor. Another factor was a lot of these people raised elk for velvet, and they'd use that velvet. They would ship that velvet to the Orient as potential aphrodisiac and so forth. The Orient put a ban on importation of antler velvet from the United States and from Canada early in 2000, and that I think was a factor too that caused the reduction in alternative livestock ranches.
And the ban was in response to?
Ban was in response to chronic wasting disease.
It was about the same time we couldn't use blood urine for being damaged.
Yeah, yep.
I don't know if it speaks to it there, as I haven't read the whole thing, but does it specify what kind of tests they must use? Because, as I understand it, tests for CWD in live animals is a relatively recent occurrence, is it not?
Yeah.
You want to answer that one, or try?
Well, any animal that comes off for slaughter,
right,
or is found dead inside the facility has to be tested for chronic wasting disease.
Okay. So there is no mandatory test on the live animal in an alternative livestock facility?
Not sure.
Physical examination.
Pardon me?
No physical sign of chronic wasting.
Yes.
It's the annual inspection. But going back to the initiative, my third concern was hyperfixation with red deer. That's scary.
Mike, you speak to, in the ARM rule there, the administrative rule, there's reference to voluntary participation in the federal CWD program, I'll call it. I think we've also heard some comments here today about, some efforts that have come out of the industry itself. Are there those efforts? Can you speak to those at all?
I really can't, no. Livestock probably could, but no, it's, I don't live in that world a lot. It's, our administrative rules where I'm at. I brought this up just to show that there is a CWD monitoring program in the state that is required for import and export.
Another question I have, Mike, so you've spoken a little bit about the roles and assignments between the two agencies, Department of Livestock, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. If you could speak to, I assume there's also some interaction directly between the agencies, keeping each other abreast and maybe inspecting facilities together, if you could speak to that.
Yeah.
And then also, I wonder if it would be helpful to walk through the one instance of CWD positive in Montana and how the response to that fell to one agency or the other.
Sure.
And maybe Tim, that's a question to you. I don't know. But just to illustrate those roles a little more for the conversation's sake.
So yeah, just to expand a little bit on the different roles. We're facility and records. Livestock is animal health, and they have records. And the producers have to report to both agencies. Those records are kept separate. If we have an issue with alternative livestock facility, we can take our records, which are independent, and compare them and find out what the discrepancies are as far as number of animals. That's one thing we do. And I am the liaison with, or to the Department of Livestock for the purpose of alternative livestock animals. And we do that on a pretty regular basis, and exchange reports. And if they find something that's not right, they'll let me know right away. Or if I find something that's doesn't seem right, I'll let them know, and we'll exchange notes. So we work together pretty closely, both administratively and in the field. Our wardens work with livestock inspectors if needed. As far as the roles, what happened in Phillipsburg, I can't really speak to. In the livestock, pretty much, they have the quarantine authority.
Right. And livestock obviously took the lead. They are responsible for disease issues on alternative livestock branches. They took the lead, and their decision was to depopulate that particular herd. And they were, I think there were at least 3 teams. Each team consisted of 4 or 5 people: pathologist, veterinarian. They came from Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, and all those animals. I actually was the only one there from Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. All those animals were euthanized. I kind of laughed when I saw the guy in the suit. You know, the guys in the suits picking up the animal. I took, I don't know, I think 6 tubes of blood from each one of those animals, and we weren't suited up. But they were all, I think there were 70 samples taken from each one of those animals, and they were distributed to various laboratories for research, including the blood that was taken from those animals. We did have some Fish, Wildlife, and Parks personnel on the periphery, you know, up in the hills around that particular facility, should anything during the operation get loose. But it was a Department of Livestock operation, and they did a very good job of putting it together and getting it done.
Any other questions?
How often are these facilities checked?
None are on a scheduled basis. We are required to either do it on a scheduled basis or do it at a reasonable time. And that's the wardens working with the producers, making arrangements to inspect the facilities. So it's not on a regular basis. I've been pushing harder to get that. That's why I show that film. Because there's not a board in the state that wants that shown up in their district.
But again, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Wardens, we're only responsible for the fence around the perimeter, correct?
The exterior fence.
Yeah.
Can you also just talk about Phillipsburg and now that that has been de-licensed or, yeah, license has expired, what that means for the fencing?
Yeah. What that means for fence. Yeah, when a license is either given up or is, through a court action is given up. Once that license is gone, we no longer have authority over the fence. Which sometimes we can put that into, if a case goes through court, that can be a stipulation or part of a sentence. How to make a fence wildlife friendly. So deer and antelope can go in and out freely without being trapped inside the fence.
But I think I was specifically thinking about the Kessler Ranch and the fact that we knew CWD was there. And even though it looks like maybe the fence is still standing, there's no requirement to keep that fence up. And it's sort of interesting.
I think he's using it for a horse pasture. So.
We have two ranches that border with wildlife refuges in Wyoming. Those elk are on us all the time. I guess it's amazing to me that on some kind of a schedule where, how do you know these animals aren't leaving these premises on a regular basis? Is there a way are they required to notify you of that?
Once, yeah, and that was one thing I was going to cover. Let me just pass these out. I don't want to get too deep in the laws and administrative rules, but I want to make sure you have a copy for your reference.
So Brett, did I understand you correctly that in Wyoming you have properties that are adjacent to game farms?
No, they're Wyoming Game and Fish Wildlife Refuge.
Oh, okay. But those aren't fenced?
They are high fenced.
Oh,
yes.
they are. Well, your property's high fenced? Or?
Their property's high fenced.
Their property.
They are, where we border each other, they're high fenced.
I see. Yeah, good.
So those are fenced in?
They are.
On the state land?
They go from state land to forest, but yes, they're fenced away from our agricultural purposes.
And it's not 100%.
Oh, no, it's not any, no.
I don't understand how they can do that.
No, it's not 100%. We have built-in jumps and, we have a bunch of stuff built in from our properties to where when they do get out, we can, and it's mostly in the winter time, we try to herd them back into the properties, but, and they do it a lot themselves. This winter, when we rode the fence, well, in two situations, we rode the fence, in one situation, was so much snow this winter that the elk actually just pulled the top of the fence. And in the other situation, you wouldn't think a dog could fit through the hole that, 150 elk went through. It's just amazing to me what an elk can get through when they really want to.
Yeah.
They don't bother us, they're not hurting us, but it's, but the idea of it is, if you're on a game farm, I know what elk will do. I can just imagine what these guys, the possibility of them can be.
So here's an example of an elk that gets out. This is a game farm elk from a facility that's closed southwest of Dillon. That elk was shot in the Pimper Mountains by a hunter using a state tag.
How often does that happen?
That's the only time I know of.
It's happened before.
It has
Both, it's amazing. I would get calls occasionally. There was some elk that escaped from Saskatchewan, and we shot two of those around Glasgow. Or hunters shot two of those. But not just game farm elk. It's interesting. I got another call one time, and it was an elk that had a tag in its ear, and I was able to try to trace that back to see what its origin was. And that particular elk, and this I think was shot in the breaks, in the Missouri breaks. That elk had been tagged. It was a wild elk. but it had been tagged on the Teddy Roosevelt refuge. So up the drainage, I think that was like 250 miles. It was pretty amazing that that animal had gone that far. But there's been other instances where animals have been shot with tags and mirrors.
I heard around Garrison.
That was a long time ago, before my time. But yeah, there was one shot over there at one point, and that as I remember, they thought that had been an elk that was being transported, and during the course of transport it escaped.
So the question I understood was that it was not just an escape, but a hunter kill. Mike, can you characterize the rate of escape from game farms? Is that something that happens once only in a great while, or is that?
Do once in a great while.
Okay.
That's one reason the livestock has to keep different records. If there's a discrepancy, we'll look at the records and try to figure out why the animal comes off. This elk, I'm guessing probably escaped in the summer. He's made his way, I can't remember which range that is, but it goes up in the Finland Mountains. This guy was from California, state tag, shoots it, tags it, takes it back to California. He was all excited because he knew there was an elk study going on somewhere in that area. And since it had ear tag, he thought it was part of the study. So, and he mailed the tag back, and it was a Department of Livestock tag. And we traced it back to the game farm that's no longer operating.
And it had not been operating at the time he shot?
It was licensed.
It was licensed at the time that this happened.
Elk went missing.
What year was that?
That was the fall of 2014.
I thought, didn't the regulations about the quality and aren't these things double fenced now? In Montana?
No, unless we require it.
Have we required that on any facility?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
I think that one in Whitehall, that double fenced, Chris used to go over and check that.
Yeah, I don't know. If they did it on their own. Okay.
Of the 26 that we currently have in Montana, how many of them have elk? Do you know?
And just a clarification on the Wyoming Game and Fish Wildlife Refuges, they're a wintering habitat area, so they're not, it's not like they're fenced completely in all the time.
So 19 of the 26 have animals on it. And a lot of them don't have animals, just keep the license. And if they do keep the license, they need to maintain their fence. They need proof condition. So,
Mike, in your capacity, can you speak at all to the frequency of CWD detections in alternative livestock game farms in the U.S.? Is that something that, how would you, and maybe if not numbered, maybe you characterize as that's fallen off considerably, that happens consistently?
I couldn't take a stab at it. You know, I have to get you which states have CWD animals, the frequency
We're just getting at the effectiveness, if there's some measure of effectiveness of the CWD program that sounds like that comes out of federal oversight.
Yeah. Our game farms don't import a lot. There's one that has some exchange with deer. It's primarily in Texas. But we primarily export elk. As far as the frequency of CWD game farm in other states, I think take a stab at that one. So when we do our inspections, let me back up a little bit. So we can revoke licenses for a number of reasons. If you look at the statutes, which are 87-4, 87-4-421 lists, has a whole listing of criteria that we can civilly revoke the license on, and we haven't done that. But one game farm around Kalispell, that the fence was in deplorable condition, gates were off, big trees had fallen over, knocked the fence down, and we told the operator that he had to fix the fence, because you have to keep it in game-proof condition. He said, I'm not gonna fix my fence. And it was that short, so we just chose not to renew his license.
What does that mean? Does he get rid of all, his animals?
There weren't any animals in there.
Oh, okay.
It's just that he doesn't maintain the fence.
Oh, that.
They'd all escape.
No, no problem.
First one died. So without getting real deep into this, the 12-6 numbering, that's our administrative rules. Those are the rules, which are really the nuts and bolts of what we do. And there is a series of different fence standards depending on when the facility was built. So you go before or after 92 or 99. So the one thing I wanted to point out in here is 12-6-1535. This is what we've been talking about, game-proof condition. You know, condition of having an alternative livestock license is the exterior fence must be designed, constructed, and maintained in a game-proof condition at all times. And then animals inside these facilities are private property, and the rules outline when or how much time a person has to recover the animals that escape. If they don't recover them, they become property of the state.
So under one of the laws that my wife proposed, it sets requirements for fences. Has to be inspected annually. The animals have to be inspected annually by a accredited veterinarian. It maintains a fence at least 8 feet high around the facility, and the facility is located within 30 miles of confirmed positive occurrence of CWD is double fence to prevent contact between captive and mollusker. So it spells it out black and white here. So if they want to capture urine for sale in Montana, this is what they have to do.
So Mike, that's still, or Joe, I guess first, that's still under consideration.
Yeah, it's in front of House Fish and Game.
Okay, and then Mike, you said that as of now, you don't have regularly scheduled visits, so that would make them annual under statute.
That would make us go to a scheduled inspection.
Is that more or less how often it happens now, like once a year, or?
Some are, some are not.
Okay.
The ones that don't have animals in probably don't get inspected, but every 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
So this is only if they want to comply and collect urine. If they don't want to collect the urine for sale, they don't have to comply with that. If they do, they would have to comply with that. They would show an ATA certification or a certification that's the commission adopts. So that's how we set it up.
Okay.
And I think someone told me there's a couple places around Missoula that does, but I don't know.
So my understanding is that they can hunt.
Correct.
Okay, so what are these 26, what are they doing with these animals? Just the meat?
Primarily, the smaller ones are for their own consumption.
Their own consumption.
They'll slaughter a couple every year. The two bigger ones, like I said, they're exporting elk to two different game farms in Idaho. And it's south of, the game farms are owned by Rulon Jones, football player. He's got two huge ranches down there and in Utah.
Right.
So that's primarily where our elk go from Montana.
Do they sell any for human consumption in restaurants or anything like that? Or is it?
They may. That's something we don't track.
There was one, excuse me, one licensee who does have a website and on a regular basis does offer elk meat. Excuse me. And in fact, Lake Tahoe area, he used to ship a lot of elk venison down to that area. When elk are slaughtered, there are regulations by the state as well that if you're going to bring a different species in other than cattle, it's the only species you can handle that day. You can't, do elk in the morning and do cattle in the afternoon. So there's a few slaughterhouses around the state that do that. And there's, occasionally in this one operator in particular, and there's another one too that I was aware of. But they will slaughter animals and ship meat around the country.
So Tim, would they have to go through USDA then?
Yes.
So they have to ship it to a USDA facility?
Yes.
Process?
Yes.
Mike, when you say that, in reference to state, after a certain number of days, the animals, I think you said become property of the state, just trying to understand just exactly what that means, so.
Yeah, that means that they're no longer private property.
Okay.
That is a election.
So in the context of roles and responsibilities between the two agencies, the Montana Livestock and Wildlife Department, who does that task fall to?
Yeah, fall to us.
Okay.
So I'll just briefly go over, there was a game farm by Lewistown that had fence conditions that they were never corrected. Year after year, we documented it through inspections. We got reports of wild animals in there. We flew it, the facility's about 1,200 acres. We flew it, we saw mule deer in there, we saw antelope in there. And Department of Livestock went in and did a herd inventory, and there was untagged elk in there that we are fairly certain were state elk. But definitely the deer, the mule deer and antelope were state. And they were charged criminally in Fergus County. And that went through the court, and they ended up, part of the plea deal was they had to get rid of their license. And at the time, they had about 230 animals in there that were tagged that we knew of. But then there was 12 deer, 2 antelope, and untagged elk that we're fairly certain were state elk, but we couldn't do it.
So is it like the guy down in Gardner, he just baited in and they opened the gate, baited in?
We think that may have happened. We don't know that. Whether he's leaving that gate open. And this guy was along the Judith River. He's in the Judith River breaks. So he had wild elk right up to the fence during the rut. So whether he's leaving the gate open or not, we don't know. But we ended up giving him 180 days to depopulate or relinquish his license, which he did. These are just some pictures of, this is what the Department of Livestock does with their inspection. And this is some of the required equipment they had inside their facility. These squeeze chutes and handling equipment. So there's an elk without an ear tag in it.
So they just have to ear tag, or they have to tattoo them, or what do they do?
There's two tags, there's the Department of Livestock tag and then a USDA metal tag that goes in there. We got one in each year.
Like a bank tag?
Yep.
Oh.
And they have,
They use the RB51 or was it
I think they just use a tag.
Right, they're not vaccinated.
They're not vaccinated.
Oh, they just tag.
No, well, it's a different tag.
It's a different tag.
Silver tag.
Oh, sorry.
Individual ID tag. It's
Oh,
a
okay.
state of origin, and it has an alphanumeric number.
Oh, so it's one of that.
Yeah, it's issued to that game farmer, or the veterinarian that puts the tag in.
Yeah, like a serial number for that.
Oh, okay. These have two and bull on the right there, that's the green each
You had two of them in the year?
Yeah,
I like
yeah.
two cows.
Yeah.
So the elk that we found in this place, the owner had to sign an affidavit stating that those were his elk.
Doesn't he have to have some kind of bill of sale or anything?
They were born in there.
Another point of interest, that particular facility did have an egress issue where, if I remember correctly, 26 animals escaped from that facility. And he reported it. We gave him, a couple days to get those animals back into the facility. He got, I can't remember how many of those. And then our wardens went out and hunted the rest of those animals. And I think we were pretty successful in accounting for all the animals in the end. But that was an escape of 26 animals.
Mike, is there in the conversations here on frequency of inspections for fences by FWP staff, is there a requirement, obviously some of the facilities are producing all, presumably annually, is there a required frequency of inspection you're taking for the new elk then that come into the game farm population?
Yeah, the tagging requirements here from Livestock, I think it's, if an elk is born in there, they have 12 months. You're tagging about 4 years.
And I have a question, I don't know who it would fall to, Emily, Jennifer, or Justin. When we did some work on identifying high-risk areas to help us focus surveillance, how much of that was measuring proximity of positives in neighboring provinces and states versus location of alternative livestock? Or were alternative livestock locations at all in that this moment?
They weren't.
They weren't at all.
Yeah, they weren't included at all. And I think, our proposal for surveillance now does incorporate that Kessler area, around Phillipsburg, with the intention of going back and just checking those populations. But yeah, no, it doesn't explicitly account for game farms.
And does that reflect, is that a, the one better way to put it, is that a statement of confidence that, the record of, we don't have a history of multiple CWD positives, and, through the industry and the oversight that there's some confidence there that those don't represent
I think,
sources or potential?
theoretically they could pose a risk, but right, they do have to go through health monitoring. And I think there's a limit to the number of animals that are being brought in every year. I mean, I think on the livestock, it's a really small number annually. Do you remember what that is? So there are not a ton of new animals coming in, and there are restrictions on, their health. It's not foolproof. And I think when we've talked about moving outside of those high priority areas that are adjacent to known CWD cases on our borders, one of the criteria for selecting those areas, sort of random roving surveillance areas, might be proximity to other game farms in the state. That might be interior to the major risk areas, but that might be one way to prioritize that additional sampling.
I would add that in '99, when those 83 animals were euthanized on the ranch in Phillipsburg, there was sampling done around that particular game
Yeah, and Quentin, that was about the extent of our conversation. I guess we just assumed that, we knew that that particular ranch wasn't operating anymore, and when we had looked previously, and even subsequently as we rotated around the state, we hadn't found anything. And that's about all we talked about. We just assumed that we would have known if there was more risk, but I guess, as we've learned more and, talked with Mike, I don't think our level of confidence is as high, and that's why Emily has brought back in.
Yeah, I mean, right, if you don't want to find CWD, probably looking like 1 to 2 years right after the positive detection on the Kessler Ranch would be a good way to achieve that, because the incubation period's so long
Right.
and prevalence would have been so low that our odds of detecting it would have been really, really low. So I think now is a good time to go back and just double check.
Are there any animals in that facility now?
No.
Not even cattle?
Maybe horses,
Horses.
but no.
Horses.
Maybe horses.
So I'm just flipping through pictures of the inspection that we did. This is one thing we do. This is the same facility that had fence issues.
This is the one I understand.
North of Livestock.
So what would be your minimum standard for on ground, or do you give a couple inches, or what?
It's right in the administrative rule.
Oh, is it?
Yep. This, what we're documenting here is bottom of the fence is 12 inches above the ground. Could a deer slide under there? Possible.
They will, oh, yeah.
I'm 6'15", 31", minimum fence requirements.
I mean, this looks like it's more than a foot. Maybe 17 inches. So, and then we flag it with a survey tape, so we know where it's at. This isn't high enough. Like 6.5 or 7 feet is all.
If you find that fence that's not compliant, this 1,200 acres, what's your time frame for repairing the fence?
Depends on what kind of shape it is in. I mean, if it's fence laying on the ground, you walk across it, yeah, you need to fix it down. If it's 7.5 feet instead of 8, we'll say, okay, we'll give you a couple months to run a barbed wire across the top, or figure out a way to get that up to 8 feet. Normally, we give people a time frame to comply, depending on the conditions. There's another spot that's a foot off the ground.
I'm curious, Mike, so thinking about, when that initiative was in front of the Montana Public Signature Gathering. I recall there were a lot of contentious discussions, obviously, as the different perspectives were speaking to that point. Would you characterize as so in your interactions with the remaining facilities, has there come to be, is it a good working relationship on the whole?
With some.
Okay.
Some still carry that.
I think there was a takings lawsuit over that, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Right afterward, courts found it wasn't.
That's pretty bad shape there.
Clean that they would.
But it's all it up, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And a prayer.
Big hole in the fence there. A lot of these are the same places that we've documented for several years, they just never got fixed.
Do you see a continued reduction of licensed facilities as years to come?
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah. The only way a license can be transferred would be to a family member through a will.
Now, is the CWD monitoring program, I assume, is voluntary?
Yeah, it's voluntary.
No. Anything that dies on a alternative
Well, it
livestock.
requires an annual inspection, a tag in each animal, both the DOL and the silver tag, and then a sampling of anything that dies.
It's over 16 months of age.
Yeah.
But if they want to export, they have to go through the additional monitoring program.
I guess on that point, it sounds like compliance is variable on some of that, and DO is working to improve compliance on those types of requirements. There've been a couple of cases where ranch owners or alternative livestock owners report very late, too late to actually test. And so there's some question about can we increase the repercussions for that sort of behavior. One theory is that it's expensive to do the testing, and so that might be one strategy for someone to lower their costs, but it works against our efforts at CWD. So they're working on improving compliance.
How much time do you have to test an animal before your samples are no longer?
It depends on the season. If it's cold out, the samples can last for a long time. I mean, we pick up things that are a couple months old.
Yeah.
Oh.
And you can still get decent tests. So, yeah, it shouldn't be too much of an issue.
So any other questions on game farms? I just want to mention a few other things and then I'll be done. Something else that I do, I go through the regulations every year and update the CWD language and the regulations. And I also have these at Yellowstone National Park. I send a bunch up to the Board of Entries with Canada, and we have them in our regional offices. Basically, it's just the language of the import rule we have. So the regs and then these, also the language on the website, we just recently updated that. Is there a place I never knew existed? But it's updated. And another thing I've been doing is the taxidermists. Something kind of shocking came to light about half a year ago, 6-8 months ago. There's a taxidermist that runs a beetle operation by Anaconda. He would routinely go to Wyoming, pick up heads, drive to his place, beetle, clean the skulls, the whole skulls. And he's been doing it for 10 years. So, and that's another location I have for the roadkill requests. Basically, we told him he needs to stop. We've had a regulation in place for 10 years. He didn't like to hear it, but he said he's going to comply, so we'll see. Oh, and then the taxidermy licenses that are renewed. I put the language of the rule right on their license and highlighted it so they can't miss it. So they can't go to another state with CWD and bring in heads, because it'd be violated. An occurrence we had in Helena, the state vet got a call from the state vet in Pennsylvania saying there was a deer head from a game farm in Pennsylvania that's CWD positive, and it is now in a taxidermy shop in Helena. So I grabbed one of the wardens in Helena, we went down there and looked at it, and fortunately it had been cleaned. There wasn't any tissue on it. But that's an example of how the states are communicating, how different agencies are communicating on this.
So that's an interesting question, Mike. So what is there something that should have prohibited that? So we have parks language and it's targeting hunters of elk. Is it hunters of wild and captive elk? Or is it hunters of wild elk in those other states?
Our rule pertains to any animal.
Okay, so that's how we read that, so.
And Pennsylvania has mandatory CWD testing for any game farm or animal. That's how we found out about it.
So that was a clean skull, So it was cleaned prior to it coming into Montana?
It was cleaned in the game farm, that's what
Okay, so it was compliant?
it was compliant, and apparently whoever operates that knew the requirement, so it's, it wasn't the only hen there, they had 12 other hens. Wait, you know, here the big, gnarly, ugly game farm, wait, you know.
I have a question, it's kind of somewhat related to that, but maybe for some of you folks who've dealt with CWD. The question I always pondered and wondered about is, how do processors deal with CWD? And do some receive animals from areas that are known CWD and some don't, or are there ways they're handling the situation? Because I can imagine a processor running a CWD positive animal through his equipment, and then what happens?
Well, they're forever.
So, do you have any experience with how the folks would deal with that?
Meat processor or taxidermist?
Meat processor primarily.
So one thing that they do is that they'll batch animals and then wait for results to come back, and if the results come back on one or more animals that are positive, that entire batch would get disposed of. Disposal is problematic. If they seek to landfill, that's still, the number one way to dispose of, but then for these non-positive animals, they send them, a lot of them use rendering, but you can't render CWD positive animals, so, and then I know, so our Department of Agriculture regulates the meat processing industry, and I know that there's some requirements, like they'll say they do all sorts of meat processing, but come the fall and they're gonna do deer, they clean out their equipment before deer and then after the season, so they can go back to chickens and turkeys or whatever else that they do. So there's some best management practices that they try to follow, but I think there's a lot of variability.
Do you get any, just since it's so hard to kill, like processors that are like not willing to process deer from CWD positive areas, just because, get on their equipment or something that, like you can clean it, but you never really, getting rid of the prions really very difficult. I mean, the odds of transfer for me is probably pretty low, but the fear factor I always worry about with some people.
Absolutely, we did have some processors that either stopped processing deer or turned away deer that were known to be from the CWD area of the state.
Yeah, our processes aren't great. I know there are some that are probably processing deer from Wyoming.
When you say regulated, Mike, does that mean to say, independent of CWD? Are there, you say best management practices, are there USDA requirements for cleaning daily or sanitizing?
I know that game has to be processed separate from domestic animals. That guy in Montana City got in trouble for that when they shut him down. That's what he was doing.
So if I got 100 harvested deer in Wyoming, is transporting that meat and heading back to South Dakota or North Dakota, he's traveling through Montana, not stopping in Montana, but he cannot legally transport that head through this river.
It's a violation.
That's good to know. That's fine.
That's just a theoretical question.
Asking for a friend.
Mike, I get that, I was
Do you give these to the meat processors also?
I have not, no.
Because I think that the majority of the ones I know are totally unaware of this. And they would take a deer from Wyoming or Utah or Iowa that somebody brings in and just process it just with all the rest.
That's a good idea, that outreach project that I probably should do before this fall.
I did go speak to the Meat Processors Association early. It was, 2005 maybe,
finding routinely, rarely, no real sense at a statewide scale, how much that
We're
happens?
not finding it a lot. There's been a couple of instances, but something that we're not really looking for. During hunting season, we're looking for a lot of other things besides that. Yeah, it's certainly, the guys are aware of it. But during hunting season, we're chasing phone calls. So we're not spending, we don't have time to spend. Looking to spend.
I know there's been a lot of coordination between, I understand there's been coordination between, you know, at the wildlife agency level, you know, states that have, you know, speaking to transport of parts from states that have confirmed CWD. Has there been any talk about those states, you know, when they see non-residents secure a permit or a hunting license, communicating those prohibitions?
I don't know if other states are or what they're doing. They maybe are.
I hunt out of state quite a bit, and all they do, the ones that I'm aware of, is just their units like southern Wyoming and northern Colorado. They just have asterisks on the hunting units, and they just say, you know, they make you aware that these are CWD hunting units, and you know, just caveat emptor.
And that, just for clarification, so is that in the application packet or the hunting regulations, or is that an award letter? Are you reading off that an award letter to you when you get that license?
They make you aware when you're applying for the tag in these limited entry units. Most of them are limited entry type units for drawing. But if you draw the tag, you know, like Colorado will make you aware that it's a CWD. They don't tell you what to do when you're bringing it home.
Anything else? This is what I show you this website. When I update the regs and the wording and language in the states on various publications, this is where I get my information. So, I mean, it could be a good resource for you guys to look up information.
The information that's on this card does come directly from our commission rules right now. As Joe mentioned, there's a bill in the legislature right now to make this statute. There's been a change in that, and I just wanted to bring that up. There was a question in the committee meeting from one of the senators or representatives, I can't remember. And the question was this: what about the archery hunter that goes to Wyoming and harvests a buck or a bull that's in velvet? Can he not bring that back? Right now, he can't, but that bill has been changed now, so that velvet is allowed, right, Joe?
I don't know if they've changed it. I don't think they've changed the language. We talked about that.
Oh, is that right?
And it does, I misspoke on that.
Okay.
If you look at that language, it is antlers and tissues. And so velvet is prohibited.
Right, it is prohibited.
Yes.
But I know there was initially a change in that bill to allow velvet antlers, so that has been retracted.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I believe so.
Is formaldehyde denatured or pre-empted?
No.
That's the way
I
they usually preserve them.
recently scraped off tissue from glass slides that were formaldehyde fixed. They've been on that slide for 15 years, and I inoculated animals and transmitted the disease.
Well, thanks.
15 years.
That's good to know, because if they do offer amendment on that, I'll bring that back up. Because I was trying to think of some way, because I know there's quite a sport going into early season to velvet animals and bring that back in.
Whether it's important to know that that particular sample was not CWD from a certain, it was a human TSC agent. most groups would agree that while the titer of infectivity may be reduced, it doesn't seem to disappear.
It's analogous in scrapie. I think they had a case of infection in a paddock or whatever, and then 16 years later, they put sheep back in there, and those sheep contracted scrapie. So TSCs are pretty stable.
I know they cleaned a facility in Colorado, and they put it back in, and they got it again, and cleaned it again, and I don't know if they burned it down or what, but they couldn't get rid of it, so. Yeah, I was trying to figure out a way to do some sort of drying process on that velvet. You know, like a 60-day wait where there wouldn't be any wet blood or any transferable wet tissue, but
The work that's been done on velvet shows it's infectious, but it's very low compared to CNS and spinal cord combined, but it's still there.
That's what I was just gonna ask, and you know, trying to ponder that question. You know, you've got a guy that's harvested a, white-tailed deer in velvet. Well, our concern with carcasses coming back to Montana, I think, basically is that those carcasses end up in the ditch, or end up in an inappropriate area once they've been butchered by, the person that harvested them, or whatever the case might be, or don't go to a Class 2 landfill. But that velvet animal, I mean, if he wants to bring that velvet animal back, it's going to go to a taxidermy shop. And it's going to go up on a wall someplace. I don't think there's going to be too much chance of transmission to servants. So I was a little shaky on that. But safety is, to be safe is good. But what do you guys think?
Yeah, what do you guys think, professionals? Don't look behind you.
So the story about the New York case is that animals were brought from the west to a taxidermy facility, and he would extract the brains and put them on the floor, and he also rehabilitated fawns, and he would feed the stuff to the fawns. And so, I mean, you can't say never. So, but obviously, there's other materials that are at risk if those heads are not, nervous tissue and other things too. So, I would be cautious.
If you're at the level of worrying about velvet, really the meat and the fat are probably very similar levels. I don't know what Mike can comment on that, but muscle tissue and fat have low levels of infectivity as well, so probably very comparable with velvet. So they're all kind of in the same boat. The way the laws are written now are good, and they've got the high-risk tissues on the list of being regulated, but there's still tissues on that list that carry CWD.
Well, I was trying to think of, my wife asked me what kind of animals brought it. I thought of, or actually, you said some yearling bulls have velvet, the really mature ones. I said some of the females that grow antlers have the velvet. I didn't think about early season bow. And I mean, they have some monster racks that are complete velvet. So, I mean, how do you say no to a guy who's bringing a 36-inch mule deer trophy velvet back?
I think you could get around it because what is allowable is taxidermied heads.
So it'd be processed there.
Processed in the state of origin, which was a CWD state. You've still got the velvet, but it's a taxidermied head.
But it has tissue. It specifically says tissue.
Right.
It's up there. That section E, or letter E, is the
right
amended word.
To remove flesh and tissue.
But Brent said that the infectivity wouldn't be any greater than that of muscle.
I don't think any one group has compared muscle to velvet to fat. I mean, most fat's minimal in most of these animals anyway, but yeah, realistically, there's infectivity in the muscle of these animals.
My wife asked me about it. I said, don't say anything until someone brings it up. So I don't know how to handle it.
And realistically too, yes, you're cleaning the spinal cord out and trying to get the brain out of that case.
Right.
There's still infectivity on the edges of the meninges, the dura mater's highly infectious. So even best practices, you're not making the risk zero, and those risks are probably higher than velvet, I guess.
I would imagine a lot of the meat processors too don't go through and make sure they get every lymph node out either.
Exactly, and the lymph nodes get cut into the cuts in there.
Right.
Hemorrhages.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a good start on what you're trying to move out, but you're not preventing
You know,
transporting.
it's hard to go up there and try to write a bill that is clear, concise, and simple. Yeah, and try to include everything without having a list 10 pages long. I mean, you don't start naming every lymph node and every little, you know, medulla, everything, you don't. Yeah, you don't. I mean, the Senate guys got hung up on skulls. I mean, that's why that one sentence was added. And so, it was, it's tough. I mean,
The one thing I brought up to John earlier is that there are a lot of animals that come from Wyoming into Montana that are poached. And I'm sure the same thing is happening on all of our borders. And they're being, on our ranch, in 1 year, we had 50 bull elk that the heads were transported back into Montana. The rest of the carcass stayed. And then they're being sold. I don't know where they go. But that's a huge issue that's occurring in the CWD state. And we have deer, all the time that we find the heads chopped off. And I know they're coming north. I can stop that, but there's a lot of things that are coming across the state line.
landmines. Yeah.
One of my neighbors posted 80 elk a year.
You know, we're trying to do what we can possibly do, I mean, to slow it down, so, you know, it's kind of like Chris said, it's just a matter of not if we're gonna get it, it's just a matter of when. So I'd rather get it in 30 years than in 5 years.
Right.
So, it's, you know, hopefully these two bills slows it down, or hopefully these two bills bring enough public awareness and discussion. I know the urine bill, the urine bill went AP and went nationwide. We were friends of ours called us from DC saying, what the hell? You're legalizing urine? It's like, well, it ain't mine, it must be urine. But then you start talking about chronic wasting disease and they're going, oh. And so, I don't know what kind of reception we're gonna get. So this is the, number 2 is the, talking about the rules that we took from the Archery Trade Association. And they're very paraphrased. But I think it establishes good standards, good minimum standards. The thing is, when we first started writing the bill, even the RVF, who I work with quite a bit, actually opposed it. They said, no, we have an industry standard already that is established through the ATA. They oversee it, and they don't want any state to actually mess with the urine. There's already 2 states that actually have laws about Alaska and West Virginia, and they both prohibit urine. And so by establishing these standards, which like I said earlier, it's the only state in the nation will adopt standards. So it'll be pretty interesting.
The states in New England are seriously evaluating what they're gonna do about this right now, so.
Yeah, it's huge. I did, you know, I never thought about it. I was reading the Bugle magazine one day, and there's an article in there about chronic wasting disease. And I'll send it to you guys electronically. And it talks about this guy who goes out and he just starts spraying elk urine all over. Then you're like, oh my God, I might be spraying prions in the environment. And knowing about prions, they may be here in 20 years. And that's what made me start thinking about this is, why are we allowing this? And, you know, you start talking about, well, we got, you know, we started showing us those maps of different states. Well, why all of a sudden is it way up there and why all of a sudden is it over here? Well, maybe guys are spraying hot urine all over and spreading prions into the environment. I mean, look at, was it Norway? That just got a reindeer herd, CWD positive, and they think it came from deer urine from the U.S. And they're gonna wipe out 2,000 animals over there, a whole herd, just to stop this.
That's it. Well, I have the article about that. I was gonna pass it out at the end of the day for folks to read overnight or whatever, so I do have the information on, or at least an article on that Norwegian problem over there.
Do you have the map?
It's in here. Is that the map you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
I'll pass it out right now.
Right in the middle of the country. I mean, and it says right in there in the article, they think it came from deer urine.
Well, I think that's one of their hypotheses. I'm not sure they've resolved that yet.
Theorized.
So they just had a very comprehensive report that came out last week. That I can send to Emily or somebody, and it's fairly lengthy, but it's a real serious and good hard look at what they think the situation is. Yeah.
It'd be neat if, like, you sell this where we could do a subway and look at it and see where it came from, you know? I know.
Yeah. Very hard to track.
Yeah. True. So if you guys are up for it, contact the House Fish and Game and tell them to pass this chronic wasting disease bills. So it came out of the Senate Fish and Game 7-0 and 7-0. Both of them passed 50-0 out of the Senate. But you know, the House is a different animal. They just have different personality guys over there. There's a couple guys that are kind of anti-government on there. And so, yeah, oxymorons. I don't mean it that way either, so, but.